and not on one side of a speaker.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, so hello everybody. Today on Heart to Heart, welcome to a new episode. We have Kim Belair, who's the co-founder and CEO of SweetBaby. Hi, Kim.
Hello.
Hello. So if you've not seen this before, what we end up doing is just talking to other people in the games industry. People who program, people who draw, people who make sound, people who write and do narrative design. So Kim, it would be awesome if you told us just a bit about yourself, what you're doing, and what's your, I don't know, how did you even get into the games industry in the first place?
I could definitely speak to that. So yeah, hi, I'm Kim Belair. I'm a writer and narrative designer, I think, in terms of my craft and in terms of my role. I'm the CEO of SweetBaby Inc, and we're a narrative development company. And that company's kind of weird. There's not a lot of companies in that specific niche, but what it means for us is that we do everything around a game's narrative. And we're a team of 13 people at the moment, all working together to tell stories across a variety of games. And that means everything from just writing barks to script writing in general, to narrative sensitivity and cultural consultations, to narrative direction and design and leadership. In that way, we kind of exist to be flexible and to work on a lot of stuff at once, while kind of enjoying a community space as writers and designers, and keeping each other safe, accountable, and sane in a very wild industry. And the way that we got started was I co-founded it with some friends of mine, and it was very much a response to I worked at Ubisoft for 5 years at the start of my career, which a ton of educational value and a lot of very challenging things, as you might imagine, from everything that's been talked about around that company. And then subsequently, I went to another company after that called Reflector, where I was equally. I found it very challenging to work on my own and to advocate for myself and to do all those different things. And I realized that for me, my problem was twofold. And it was one, that it is a challenging industry to navigate just in general for anybody, and especially for marginalized folks. And that issue means that I can't often advocate in the ways that I want to, and two, I don't necessarily have the community that I want to have access to in the industry. So SweetBaby was created kind of for two reasons, and it was to provide a space, to provide something safe, to provide something effective, and to work on a ton of different projects at a time with a team of different folks that I really, really respect.
We have a video here that I can play that shows the rest of the team. I'm going to pop it open, if you don't mind.
Please.
All right, video. You can do it.
Paula got invited backstage by Macklemore once, but declined. Paula did not.
Yeah, I think this is taken. So a lot of the work we do is NDA'd. So we shared some footage of a game that we were playing. Amberly, who's one of our project coordinators, and she sets up a lot of different games. This was one I actually missed, but I wanted to bring it because it shows at least the rest of the team.
Okay, I'm gonna keep playing.
Backstage by Macklemore.
Damn it!
That's what I was gonna vote, but I can't vote.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Why would she decline? Or also, why would you be at a Macklemore concert?
That's a very good question. Will is not a black belt in karate.
Fortunately, unable to defend myself.
D-Bed was not voted Ubisoft Employee of the Month.
Which no one voted.
Oh, damn.
It's very good.
I knew it.
You're a provincial horseback riding champion?
You can't.
Yeah, I was 5.
Whoa.
I was 5 and
Oh.
and there was nobody else against me.
When I was working at Joe Beef, he filmed a thing there,
and they wanted to do like this special big meat platter. So they had me like out in the dark cooking on a barbecue, and I had no idea to tell if anything was done or not. So like I made this giant meat platter for him. They brought it up to him, and all of it was undercooked. So they eat it. They like go and they eat it, and then what you don't see on video is them spitting it out because it's undercooked.
Oh gosh.
Oh no.
Maria's lies or truths. Well, I forgot what you were saying.
Yeah.
She used to be a competitive swimmer back in the day. She is a ranked Pokemon TCG player, nerd if true.
What's your favorite kind of cake, Louisa?
Oh my gosh. Anything, because I'm allergic to nuts, so I always just say anything that doesn't have nuts in it. But ideally, like I also love chocolate, so usually there's this like chocolate truffle cake that I really like that has like layers of chocolate mousse and stuff.
Although, what is the green belt in? Is it Musul?
Musul one. Yeah. I have some of my belts hanging up beside. I have to figure out where to put them. I like it because I'm really bad at it. Like I just sit at my computer or sit at my desk like all day, every day. And it's really, I just feel really like I don't know what I'm doing all the time, but it's fun. It's good stress relief. People are nice.
Well, your desk area looks cool. Like looks legit.
Thank you. From the angle you can't see all of the
All right. So you all have been working with us on Breaker for like over a year now.
Yes.
It's been a
What
while.
year?
It's been over a year. It's wild. But it's been a lot of fun too. And being able to dig in with an experienced crew. You know, this is the first time I've had an opportunity to work with a group like yours. I want to there's this other video that we can play in the background while we talk more about this stuff, if you don't mind. I think this was the SweetBaby writer's room stuff. So I'm going to pop this up and then we can dig into more of the history of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Come on, video. Don't you want to load up? There we go. I'm going to make sure it's muted. Goodbye. All right. So in this video, I think we're showing the board. There's a whole storyboard here for, or not storyboard, sorry. There's a whole breakout for, I mean, why don't you describe it, Kim? What is going on in this?
So in this, and I think it's mercifully outdated at this point.
Yes.
But this is the culmination of a lot of months of working with you, working with the team, and of starting to put together like a Miro board that's a breakdown of the entire story at its core for every character, for every location, for every place, to try to track all of the information across the story and to kind of keep it all in our heads. And I think what's been really fun about this project is because we've had that year or over a year rather with you, and it's rare, especially for a team like ours, to be able to get on board so early. But we've been able to be really formative to really collaborate and to build up characters, stories, and places like in a very deep and compelling and fun way before we even get to this point of building a timeline or of execution. And I think like that's been what's been so fun and what's been so helpful about this project specifically is just like we have had a pre-production time to really get our ducks in a row, and it feels now like we're hitting this really wonderful stride as we put the pedal to the metal.
Yeah, I mean, this is again the first time I've collaborated with a team like this. That's my dog barking. Thank you, Moxie. And it's been a really rewarding experience to be able to collaborate again with people who know what they're doing, and like I half know what I'm doing and half have no idea what I'm doing. And so being able to be grounded by you all and being good collaborators, making sure that, we're staying true to kind of the roots of what Hyperlight is, that world. We're pulling from a lot of those threads that we established back in Drifter, and bringing certain parts to light here in this game, and digging in deeper and creating more lore and texture to it all, and filling in these backstories, and kind of the story you're seeing here in very blurry text, hopefully, is, takes place specifically in this new location for us, because Breaker's not a sequel. It's just it's an installment in like the grander Hyperlight world and set of stories. And being able to work on a story like this with you all has been highly rewarding, because then that means that a lot of pressure is taken off on that end. And, it's rare to meet a group like this that can, continue to be solid collaborators throughout the course of it, provide clear direction and help build that foundation, and also be able to be flexible enough to understand, like, this is the world that's been built. What do we do to +1 that? What do we do to like continue to convert that into something more meaningful for this story we're trying to tell in this part of the world?
I think like for me especially, I'll speak for myself more than just the team, but I really like working on like established stories and established IPs and established things like this, because I think that like I've definitely reached a point in my career where I've worked on a lot of different things, and it's such a different experience. Like we've done a couple projects on our own with Panic for the Playdate and some little things like that, or had more stuff that we were able to create ourselves. But what really I think strikes me about working on an IP, and specifically about working on something like this, is you get to really start to build on top of one really, really beautiful foundations. But what that means for me is that like it's a chance to go, okay, well, what do people love about this? What do you as creators value about this? What are the real touch points and pillars? And I think like largely I take the opinion that a lot of the time, just as an industry, as people, a society, we have these things that become like, cultural touch points, or that are really critically lauded or celebrated. And a lot of the time that enthusiasm that we have for them and the love that we have for them can be separated from, I guess, a lot of the more logically creative elements of them. So what I mean by that is to say that like a lot of time we love something very passionately, but we don't really know what it is about that thing that's making us love it. And the fun for me of being in narrative on an IP that's established is whether or not I'm a fan before, whether I'm like, but I've never ever seen it before, whether I'm like a diehard, it lets me take that step back and start going, okay, well, what makes this? What are the actual pillars of an IP? What are the actual things that we want to maintain? What are the things that we want to subvert? And having, I guess, a legacy behind us even lets us start to question the foundations and start to let us tell a more interesting story.
We've had a number of conversations, even recently, a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking, and I was like, oh shit, I think we need to do something different. And it was a whole thing about words in our game. And it was a lot about, what did Drifter establish, and like what is the identity of a Hyperlight game, really? Like, what's the fabric of it, and what makes it a Hyperlight game? What makes it special in that way? And just like, is it that there's no text? Is it that there's, all these other, like, well, no, really, like, being able to work through those things from somebody who's coming in later on that process, who wasn't like steeped in those things for years upon years, is also exceedingly helpful to get that different perspective. And to understand, like, well, really, I think we made some goofy comparisons to the type of writing that we wanted to do for it as well. I think we meandered a lot through a bunch of different things, and we ended up with, like, what?
The interesting thing for me, I think that's exactly it. It's like being able to ask that question of taking a game that is silent, right, but that has absolutely a mood, right? It has a story, it has a lot of these things. Yeah, and going, wait a second, okay, we actually... what if they were to speak? What does that sound like? And to do that, you have to kind of start deconstructing what it is. Yep. Because is it the wordlessness that makes it, or is it the mood that's conveyed by that wordlessness? Yep. And how do you capture that? Right. Or how do you subvert that and change it and make that a deliberate action instead of just going willy-nilly into a bunch of words.
The thing that we never want to do, or that I never want to do as a creator, and I think for our games at Heart Machine and working with you all, by extension, it's like the thing we never want to do is just like hand wave it away. Even if it's a challenge, even if it's like a brutal challenge to make sure like, is this going to fit the fabric of our world? Is it going to be grounded and believable in the rules that we've established as creators? And to me, that's one of the fundamental parts of design on every front. And this isn't just like, gameplay design. It's like, no, we're talking about audio design. We're talking about narrative design. We're talking about, even just like how a character moves. Like each one of these components of these games are very intentional. And when we feed into the narrative and we're talking about like the mystery and vibe of Drifter and what we're pulling from that, like what we're translating from it and how that works in a narrative scenario with speech, with dialogue, not VO, but emotes and things like that, and more explicit characterization, it starts to revolve more around, as you're saying, like what is that tone and how is it carried forward? There's this air of mystery. So is that a key component? And like, yes, I think that is. There's this kind of like inner set of mysteries that you're continuing to unravel throughout about the characters, about the world, about your mission, why you're there, like all these different elements that can stack and build and create tension. And to me, that tension is a really big part of what made Drifter successful in its tone. And its atmosphere building was like you always felt like there was a sense of dread just around the corner or in the room that you're in, even in a like lush, beautiful forest. Like there's something not right about these spaces, not just because enemies can ambush you, because all the work that was put into the audio, all the work that was put into the lighting and level designs and whatever else. And being wordless, we had to rely purely on those elements. But now that we have actual words, that like, if anything, it adds to that experience and really bolsters, that.
Yes, but I think that's kind of to pursue our discussion. One of the things we kind of went over was what level of words, right? What level of words becomes a vector for explanation to the player, right? Where we just need to get certain things across, versus what kind of words do we need to sell those same feelings that we want to achieve,
right,
as we had in Drifter. And I think the question that like always interests me is to kind of think, okay, what do people love about this? What do people think they love about this? And then what, as creatives, were you and your team intending with that? Because for me, they're often like three different things. There's the intention, and then if we kind of carried that off into the next game, that would be great, and we would just make something cool. But I think once you have a success like you did, the cool part is then going, okay, well, what of that message got conveyed accurately and was appreciated?
Right.
And also, what did the appreciation of the audience and the certain things that they liked, what did that make you feel about your own product? And kind of those inputs create the output for moving on in the franchise. It's like our intentions may have changed, our intentions may have altered, but I think like even tonally, right? It's like, is the tone inherent to the universe, or is the tone inherent to the game and something we can change in different ways?
Yeah, we talked a bit about Zelda and Mario, and while they're not the most amazing stories, I think the core kind of piece there to follow, or like thread to tug on, is that each game ends up being its own thing in a lot of ways. They experiment at Nintendo, especially in the Mario games, with stylistically what's going to be happening, just the worlds that they want to build, and that has an influence on like what your idea of a Mario world is, whether it's an Odyssey or otherwise. And that's the type of stuff where it's like, it's still a Mario game. Even Odyssey, which is a very odd one in a lot of ways, visually and otherwise, and the kind of incoherent, inconsistent visual styles, like it still reads true as a Mario game, just as like Super Mario World does, which is a side scroller. And it's like, what are the qualities about those games, even on the story and narrative side, because it does have it, and the characterizations, like what are the
really
things?
Does.
Yeah, what are the things that make any of these series that have flexibility identifiably that series?
Yeah, there's and speaking specifically about like Mario and his friends, it's always like, I think there's a tendency to think that they are just kind of avatars you can plop into any scenario and sure, they'll change accordingly. But I think that like they're wildly consistent characters. Like,
yes.
whether or not we can necessarily track everything. We had a discussion, actually, a little team discussion before this about how old Kirby was, but like things like that are
Endless.
Yeah, well, the answer was between 7 and 13 or 200, I think it was. And then also the official wiki said like 29. So he's a millennial.
Okay.
So I think the Mario, to get back to the Mario thing, it's like we all have an idea of who these characters are that is almost subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like we could tell a lot of the time if like Waluigi was out of character in a way that we might not even be able to describe until we see it.
Right.
And that for me is like it's often something that you get out of a legacy character, but I do think that Nintendo specifically is surprisingly careful in ways that we don't necessarily see about the ways that these characters express themselves to the point that like I have a lot of opinions about Bowser. Like I think he has a personality that's well beyond just like, oh, he's the bad guy, and that is formed, I think, by years of games. It's formed by years of sports games. It's formed by the ways that he has the existence of Baby Bowser or Bowser Jr. and even the ads that he's appeared in. We have this like kind of amalgamation of years of Bowser experiences, and I think what Nintendo's good at is actually tracking the ways that we feel and changing that sentiment when they want to change it, so that they can play with that character in something like Super Mario RPG, or much later in Bowser's Inside Story, or in that one ad where Bowser's teaching you about parental controls. Like those for me are the same guy.
I play that ad every night before I go to sleep. It's
so good. I play that, and I play the Sephiroth announced trailer for Smash.
Yeah, that one's also good. Well, let's transition back into some SweetBaby stuff. I know there's, I have a lot of curiosity here and kind of questions on this. So, I mean, you're a CEO running a company, and I understand how difficult that kind of stuff can be. How do you, if you do at all, balance out those responsibilities of, running this company and also being a creative part of it?
I think I'm doing it better now than I have in the past, where I've definitely focused more on the creative and that. But I think after a couple of years now, I'm in a very comfortable place at managing both. And what I've kind of realized is the more responsibilities I get, the less I get to work on the minute to minute stuff. But the more I get to, I think, direct, and also the better I think I get at directing something. And a lot of the time, I feel now that I'm at my best when I'm doing creative leadership and not even touching some of the materials, but I'm almost serving as like I'm going to do the brief, I'm going to do the shape of it, I'm going to work on the structure, and then I'm going to help whoever is working on the words or something to kind of get it there.
Right.
And I think at the beginning there was this weird feeling when I started the company, because when I started it first, I was kind of like, okay, well, I have to really prove myself as a writer. I have to do all these different hours of writing and all these different things. And when I was doing more of the business side, I felt like, oh no, but I'm not being creative. And then I realized like, no, I'm 100% enabling creativity.
Yep.
And that is the best form for me right now of that, because it keeps me sharp. I don't get bogged down. And also I get to see the results of that work in my team and the results of that support in my team. And I think of myself very much as simultaneously like leadership and also support class in that way. And I think like it's the reward of it is just seeing everybody else get to explore a lot of their talents and kind of being able to impart some knowledge. Because that's the other thing, is that I'm only now at the point in my career, like at about just under a decade, where I'm like, at this specific job, I've been writing in other media, I was doing marketing, I was doing a lot of different things, but as a writer, I'm at this point, and I really do feel like I am finally confident enough to say, I think I can give a direction that will help a person finish the right thing, and I think I can do that without necessarily writing it myself. And that's not to say that I don't. Like, I still definitely hop in and like to do a lot of writing on certain projects.
Sure.
On this one, I really wanted to like handle certain voices and certain characters. But I really also think there's so much value for me and especially in the different voices that we're going to have in a project like this. I want to empower other people on my team to provide those voices, and then I want to shape them with some kind of direction. So it's gone from being something that I'm like, oh no, am I not doing enough, to I'm loving doing this part, and the business side for me has felt very natural in following that.
That's good. That's not always what happens. It's hard to find that blend of people that were or can be very creative, but then learn how to delegate, learn how to direct, because that's what directing is, like harnessing your creativity to empower other people, like you're saying, and handle any of the business side of stuff too. It's like it's a challenging balancing act. It takes a lot of time and effort and energy to make sure that you're giving enough of yourself to like all these tasks and giving them their due that they need, while also making sure that you're not destroying yourself.
And especially like as a writer, there's so much of that, like, or as any creative really, or maybe any human being, it's that feeling of like, well, am I doing the right thing? Am I good if I'm not always doing this single task? Like, so many of my years were just spent like writing the most amount of words for a single project to get as deep as I can, and going like, no, but I can add more. I can add more words. Like, you want some more words? You can just do this. And then just at this point, I'm like, well, no, that's not the best thing to do. It's not, but it does take years to kind of get there and be comfortable with like
more is always
seeding
better.
power. Yeah, absolutely.
You want to stack it on.
Yeah.
All right, I have some other questions for you. So can you tell me a little bit more about SweetBaby and in relation to like marginalized talent and how you approach that subject? That's something in the games industry that's difficult to talk about for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is for a lot of different reasons.
For a lot of different reasons,
Yeah. So for our side of things, so initially SweetBaby was created because of those 5 years at Ubisoft and then those other things, and the idea was truly like, I have to keep working because I love to work. I need to write. I need to tell stories. I need to do whatever I can to stay in my role as a narrative professional, because it's what I love the most, and I love games, and I love all these elements of it. But those 6 years ultimately of negative experiences, like back to back, create a space where I didn't feel like I was safe to do that in the way that I had been doing it. And another thing that kind of happened at the same time was, at the end of that, I realized that I wanted to work on lots of different things, and that wasn't something that was available to me. So initially the intention was to exist as some contractors who were going to work together, because we can make a safe and happy and collaborative room. And if we're working together, there's nothing that I can be told by a client that's going to destroy me, or there's not a toxic situation that I can enter, because I'm going to have accountability, safety, and support and security around us. And so early on, we got called in to a job, and it was actually just me at the time, and it was an Afrofuturist project. And I said like, oh, hey, where are your black writers? And they said, we do not have any. We have these 3 white guys who are writing this Afrofuturist story, and this was like not long after Black Panther. This was 2019.
Okay.
And I was like, well, why? What happened? Because I feel like this is a necessary step.
Right.
And their thing was like, well, we tried. We tried to get a bunch of black writers, but none of them had the games experience. They were talented, but they didn't have the years of or the credits to get there, and we don't have time to train them. And my response, because at the time my response could not just be like, sounds like BS to me. It was that I can help with that, and I can say, well, I know how to write a game. I have a lot of years of experience behind me, so anybody theoretically who was working under or with me would have to acquire those things, or would be taught them by virtue of working with me and by virtue of working with our team. And so the offer then becomes, we'll take that on ourselves. Because I think fundamentally, I do not believe in the credit system at all. I don't believe in the years of experience, because even, and I can say this with the utmost certainty right now, as someone who is working on different things and who has in the past worked on a ton of different things, no one is writing games the same way. No one has the same pipeline. No one's doing the same thing. So there's no reason that somebody who worked for X years at like this company has necessarily that much more functional knowledge of how to do it from anybody else who's doing it for the first time.
Right.
And so that was kind of the gambit that I chose to believe was true, and it's since paid off, because what that opened my eyes to was, well, why don't we just do that a lot? Why don't we bring people in who are talented, who want to work and who want to do this? And if they can't get in, if there's a wall for them and there's a door for me, then I can step inside and I can just bring in whoever I want. That's the accountability rests with me to make sure that that product that we're going to produce is going to meet the client's expectations.
Sure.
But that, for me, can be done as long as, we keep a good head on our shoulders. And so with that in mind, we started growing the company, and in summer of 2020, there was a confluence of like everything all the Me Too stuff that was sweeping through the industry. There was the global pandemic that is still ongoing, and there was the Black Lives Matter protests that were becoming like really, really loud, and as a result, there was this like this outpouring, I think, of nominal, or at least like sometimes performative support from a lot of game developers and companies, basically saying, "Hey, let us mentor you. If you show us your portfolio," and that's cool for me. I was happy to see at least people acknowledging it.
Sure.
But the thing that I always think with these mentorship deals is like, one, do you have the time to actually invest? Because chances are you don't. And the mentorship for me is very vague. It's very just like, I'll try to talk to you, but then there's the other thing for me that I think a lot of people don't answer, which is, well, what happens when you offer a portfolio review and your marginalized like writer comes to you, hands you a portfolio, and the portfolio is really, really fantastic. At that point, what do? Because you have to realize that, like, hey, this isn't it isn't a meritocracy. So portfolio reviews from here are super helpful for young folks, but they also presuppose that the problem is your portfolio and not like the immense walls that go up anytime a person who is marginalized comes into one of these situations.
Right.
So what I did at that time was I didn't know what else to do. I started an email address called talk@sweetbabyinc.com. It was just like, you want to talk about something? Like, I don't have any answers for you, but what I can do is provide like 30 minutes of conversation, and that might look like a portfolio review if that's what you need, but I want to make it more practical. And so from that point, we started, I think, really focusing on, okay, how do we do this? How do we bring more folks in? And part of that was just growing the company from the inside as well, with people who were in our community, people who we really want to work with, people even who are already in our lives who are interested in that. And we started with them going, okay, doesn't matter if you've never written a video game before, you're talented, you're really good, we can teach you the ropes. It's a skill, and you can bring the talent and meet that. And then as we started rolling with the talking emails, we met a ton of different people and started just realizing that the problem is access. The problem, I mean, we knew, but the problem is officially access. It's that the first person who wrote to us said that no matter what, he had never gotten a response from a game dev. He had never gotten anybody to talk to him for even 20 minutes just to tell him how to approach these things. So from that point, we just said, okay, let's make that what we do. And so we have kind of a combination right now of, we have 13 in-house folks, right, who are there all around. It's folks who we just saw. And then we also have like a roster of different collaborators who are from a number of different walks of life, different like varieties of experience. And our aim is to, if we have a project that we think can help somebody who's young, who's really talented, who really wants to do this, we'll bring them in for that. And the way that we approach it is going, we have this much work to do on a given project. I always use the $10,000 figure because I'm not good at math. So if we have $10,000 of a project, and internally we can handle $7,000 of that project, then that for me is $3,000 that can go to somebody who embeds with our team, make sure that they only do whatever work they need to do to be fairly compensated, right?
Sure.
And then at the same time, they're learning. They're getting to see from the inside all these different games and all these different projects and how they come together, how they're formed. And that for me is either, there's going to be three outcomes of that. One, we've hired some folks that way, like a couple of people we work with now are people who we work with on individual projects who were like, this has been wonderful. Let's sail together. And then we also have like folks who we have just helped to get credits multiple times who want to stay contract and just kind of collaborate with us on the regular. And we also have people who, this is my favorite one, is they'll come in, they'll work on a project or many with us, and then we have gotten them cash credit and everything else that they can use to go somewhere else And all of a sudden, that person who you said, no, you're not going to come in because you don't have enough credits, has more credits than the other person that you thought you were going to hire.
That's great. I mean, that's a bit of like the revolving door model that some places have, like SNL, for example, where it's like there's a lot of these YouTube houses or whatever else for like becoming a celebrity and all that. And like there have been some pretty terrible deals where people like end up taking a stake in them for offering this fame. But like that revolving door model, the one that you're talking about that SNL does, is like you don't get anything except like, sure, you get paid. And the whole thing is you get experience, you get exposure, you get all these different elements and like hooks into the industry and access to things that you wouldn't otherwise have on that end. And so it's really interesting to have a model somewhat like that for marginalized people and voices in this industry in particular, because that's not something that's done very often or at all besides you all.
It is wild how little it's done, and also how easy it is. And that's what I think, like, you know, you and I have talked about this already in life, is just like, it's not that hard to take that risk on of, you know, that risk of a new person, because that time is not wasted. And truly, like, yeah, I think the standardization of this idea of like, well, you need X amount of training, you need X amount of this, as long as you on your side can take a little bit extra on to provide that, I think that the first and foremost, the most important thing to me at any time as a result of all my experiences is just, do I like working with this team? Is this collaboration healthy and fun? And are we happy together, and are we enjoying it?
Yeah.
Everything else can come secondary, because we're going to figure it out. Like, I feel sometimes that doesn't matter how much experience I have, I can look at 50 different games and then one will show up and I'm like, I cannot write this paragraph. And so that, if that can happen to me, I'm well aware of how much it can happen to other people, and I just want to always be cognizant of that and be a helping hand.
That makes sense. Well, do you mind if we kind of talk about some other things, about projects that you all have worked on, that you've specifically worked on? I know, let me bring this up, but Sable was one of them more recently. Let me see if I can get this out of here. Oh, why are you so tiny? Oh no.
It's so small, but
it's
it is
so tiny.
The game is fast, but the image is so small. It's extremely cute.
Oh. Let me open up this other
I can talk about it in a really small voice.
Yes, please.
Okay,
let me this is ridiculous. Okay, well, you're gonna get a blurry picture. I'm sorry. I'll try and find some higher res stuff.
Well, I can give you so the rundown of Sable. Sable's a really cool game that we were very lucky to work on. It's by the folks at Shedworks, who were a team of 2+, and by plus I mean that it's baseline 2, and other folks who come on a project basis. It's a game about a coming of age ritual called the Gliding, and a young woman named Sable who is going to travel the world, leave her clan for an undetermined amount of time, and try to figure out what it is she wants to do with her life. She goes and talks to a variety of different people in different places, and her objective is to figure out which mask she's going to wear, because everyone in this world wears a mask, and that mask defines their profession and their specialization. And when Sable begins, she's wearing the child's mask because she's not yet of age, and then she goes into the world to figure out what it is she wants to do. And it's a non-violent game, and it's hugely exploration based. And I think it's one of those projects that I think when I started it, I was really, really, really daunted by the idea of doing something that did not have the same verbs I was used to, and I was daunted by the vastness of this world and the richness of the potential lore that exists within it, and a lot of the lore that I had read, because Meg Giant actually did a lot of the initial world building with the team, and then she was on another project, and so we came in to write it. So I was also standing on the backs of a lot of material and lore, and trying to kind of go, how do I write this good in a way that does it justice, both in terms of the art, in terms of the Bible that was left to me, in terms of all of these different things, and even the music. Japanese Breakfast did the music. It's phenomenal. Like, there's so much terrifying stuff for me on this project, but I think ultimately it came out to something that I really, really love now.
Well, my browser's crashing, so that's good. Yeah, I mean, I think that game was very special in a lot of ways, and that must have been really fun to be able to write for that. There was an interesting term you brought up in there about verbs. Can you describe what you mean by that?
Yeah, when I speak to verbs, it's for me the mechanics of interaction with the game. So in the average game, I would say that a lot of the verbs of shooting or punching or destroying or whatever it is are very useful as storytelling tools to me and to a lot of the games, because for me as a narrative designer on top of the writing, and I think of myself very much as a writer who's very design focused, because my ultimate aim is not to write, it's to tell a story. It's to make sure that that the experience that we're conveying is narratively accurate and is resonating with the player. And so whenever I'm doing narrative design, the first thing that I want to know is what are the verbs that I have at my disposal, because a lot of the time you'll come into a project and you'll want to tell something, like, oh, we want to tell the story about nonviolence and about kindness, and we want to do something really, really cool. But we only have interactions for look and punch.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of time for me, the biggest problem that people have is that they want to tell a story that just doesn't fit with the mechanics that are on the table.
Like
and
Uncharted.
I think that's what creates that narrative, that ludonarrative dissonance when we're talking about a character who has to be virtuous but who can only shoot.
Yep. I mean, that's Nathan Drake, in
It's him.
in those series where he's there's a cutscene near the end. This is after, no big spoiler, whatever. It's a million-year-old game, so where you've just gotten finished murdering, 50 people mercenaries dressed up in all sorts of tactical gear, and now you're asked to shoot one person who's, I guess, innocent in some way or another, sort of, maybe. And, Nathan Drake's just like, no, that's not the type of person I am. And it's like, you're a monster, dude. What are you talking about? You're a straight up monster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I completely understand why you don't do it. Right?
Sure.
I completely understand. And especially a game at that, just fidelity
Yes.
can kind of get away from it, because it's so much like a film that we have those kind of rules for it, where it's but he's a good guy. He means well, he just has to do it, even if we, the player, are constantly shooting a lot of people who ostensibly are just doing their job and have no real stake in this.
No, they're just mercs, hanging out, doing whatever. They don't necessarily need to be good or bad. They were just hired. It reminds me,
right?
Yeah, it reminds me. I'm going to bring up the ghost of a creator that I'm not a big fan of, but it reminds me of, at least, like Zack Snyder, and the way that he treated Batman and Superman terribly in many ways. But he kind of said, fuck it, these are superheroes. These are people that will kill people, that whether by accident or intentionally. And even Tim Burton did that originally in the 89 Batman and the follow-up.
He just went for it.
Yeah, and to me, that's always been, it's been such a bothersome thing about this virtue of no murder for superheroes, which on one hand I get, but on the other hand is when you're this massive destructive force, you're in video games a lot of the times, you're basically superheroes. It's power fantasy. It's there's going to be casualties, there's going to be problems, there's going to be things that you cannot fix or prevent if you're a giant massive muscle person who can fly and gets smashed through buildings. Some of those buildings will probably end up killing people, and that's also dissonance that we end up forgiving. And at least Marvel movies end up killing people straight up, and they're not as virtuous about that, where they're can never kill. It's that's impossible. It's one of those strange things in our media, and especially with these heroes that we create, and which translates over into video games, because video games have been influenced by a lot of our mainstream media and especially cinema, to the point where they fall. A lot of these stories fall into the same traps as the stories that they're copying from.
Just to the Batman example, I was actually talking about this yesterday, about how it's not so. I'm a Batman fan in some regards, right? And I say that because I think that as a core of the character, I love that. I grew up with Batman. I'm a big fan, And I think that there's this weird kind of thing happening where there's a push towards superhero things to be more realistic that I actually think
Right.
Marvel is doing a great job right now of moving away from again. They're
Yep.
kind of like they went as far as they could, now they're kind of doubling back on it.
Yeah.
Because I think that like a lot of people will kind of do the gotcha to Batman, right? Of like, why, if he's a billionaire, is he not using his money to help the
Right.
infrastructure rather than going out dressed as a bat and like beating up as like ostensibly underprivileged people, right?
Beating up all sorts of people that like don't probably deserve to be beat up, that were like trapped in a horrible system.
Well, and that's the problem, right? And because the problem for me there is that it's a result of us trying to make these people real, to trying to turn them from like iconic fantasy characters, who they very much are in the Tim Burton sense, right?
Yes.
Into a Gotham that is indistinguishable from the city that it's filmed in.
Right.
Like, there's no difference, especially in the Nolan movies, like between normal Chicago and Gotham City. And so as a result, because everything around him, the context of it is completely real, we now go, well, no, this isn't outsized action.
Yeah.
Right? We are so scared, I mean, we were scared for a little while there to be silly about these characters, that we're like, well, Two-Face wouldn't survive very long. And like, well, that's not interesting, is it? Like, it's not really interesting if the guy
His face would be infected in moments.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, the more interesting way to do it is to go, well, let's bend the world a little bit. Let's make Gotham City a weird place where the Penguin can be elected mayor.
Right.
Right? Because at that point, I understand if in Batman Returns, if you're okay electing like truly like the worst dude in a lot of ways, the Penguin, is terrifying both aesthetically and internally. That is a world where I can accept that, yeah, maybe this guy who has a couple $1 million cannot actually solve this problem. This is bigger than him and need outside solution.
Right. It's fantastical. Therefore, we don't have to have these grounded solutions to it, because it wouldn't work otherwise. So, yeah, it's a strange thing, and I am glad that we're kind of the pendulum shifting now, and we can be more fantastical, and you can have crazy stuff where Sam Raimi comes back and is like, yeah, I'm going to do some Doctor Strange stuff because it sure is bananas. And it's like, hell yeah, I want to see bonkers Sam Raimi do stuff.
It's so much more interesting. Like I watched No Way Home finally recently, and the thing that I really appreciate about it is that at the beginning they're just like, okay, listen, I need to do something about time, and they were like, oh, well, the time stone was destroyed, so we can't do it. And then Doctor Strange is like, I can do it. I'll just do a different thing to move the plot forward.
Yep.
And that it reminded me so much of like a comic book, of that one panel where the character goes this and then has a little like editor's note at the bottom that says, this is why he can do it.
Right.
Because I don't really need to have a lot of like justifications. I just want to see Doctor Strange do a cool time thing, and then Spider-Man meet all of his other selves. I mean, that's all I want from this movie.
Oftentimes the justification just like sour the experience in the first place, because you try and find and untangle all of these like methods and ideas behind it that don't really hold their salt. You know, it's like it's the fantasy of it that's attractive, that's interesting and engaging, and that's the thing that people want to go see. And so, looping back around to video games for a moment, because we're coming up shorter on time. So I feel like we've talked a little bit about Breaker, and we talked a bit about Sable and some other projects. Talked about SweetBaby a bit. I guess what's beyond finishing out Breaker with us, like where do you want to see, like what are your ambitions that you want to maybe share or not? You can tell me to screw off and say no. I say nothing about that.
That'd be a really good twist at the end of this to just be like, hey, Alex, screw off.
Yeah, screw off, buddy. You don't need to know.
Yeah.
No, like what are the longer term ambitions for SweetBaby and how you all fit into the industry, and like what do you want to accomplish?
I think for me, and this is going to be cheesy, but I want to keep doing really good work on a lot of different things and be challenged by a lot of different story types and story executions. And I want to keep empowering like my team to become seniors who can take on another row of juniors, and that's already happening. Some of them are already seniors and some this, but I think that the way that this grows for me is not necessarily to grow where I can look at everything. It's that I hope that we can kind of assign more quote unquote captains to do this across different, across different platforms. I think that I always want to to help. I think my big thing that I like to do is to come onto a project, find out what the team really loves about that project, find out what they're really hoping to achieve, and find a way to kind of build my own team, to build my own process, and to build our own creative evaluation to delight them, to make sure that like everything that we're doing is not only good, but that it resonates and that it does something different and shows them another side. I want to bring in things like like diversity is one thing, but for me, I'm more interested in that form of representation that goes, because we have a diverse team, we can approach a subject that you wouldn't ordinarily see.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing for me creatively.
Sure.
Is that there's so many times when someone wants to explore a really compelling idea, but doesn't do it because they're concerned it's going to be offensive, because they're concerned they can't tackle it in a real way, because they're concerned that like they don't have the tools to tell that story.
Right.
I want to provide and continue to build the tools to tell those stories, because right now what's happening a lot of the time is they just don't get told.
Yeah.
Instead of being told correctly, or instead of being subversive to anybody. So we end up with these weird narratives that have like a marginalized character or a marginalized cast even, and they aren't really breaking any new ground for those marginalized people.
Right.
They are showing off a kind of person to a non-marginalized person so that they understand that. And I would rather go, no, let's skip that step and now tell something that feels really, really representative to those people, and then really new to everybody else. Because that's the thing that I think people miss out on, and I talk about this constantly. I did talk about this at GEC a couple of years ago. We don't see representation as a form of innovation, and that for me is a narrative problem. Because when we have a new kind of story, a new kind of perspective, that for me is like, I've never seen this on screen before.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think is really key creatively. It's not about, I'm not interested in coming in and just like, again, sanding down the rough edges of something by saying, take away what's offensive. I'm interested in what we can build up because we have this perspective. What opportunity can we add? What third option can we add to a binary to make sure that like this is representing somebody who's never had that experience? And that's, I think, globally what I want to do creatively. And then I just want to build more people, and I want to see a lot of the things that we're sowing right now, and a lot of the people that we're helping right now. I want to see them excel. I want one day someone that I worked with on like a Playdate project now to be the lead writer or the narrative director of something else, and talk to them, because that is how it is. It's a community, and if you put into it, it gives back to you and all that cheesy stuff. But it really does. It simply does.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's well said. Do you want to answer some questions with me?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. All right. So Sephiroth's Up Special says, Kim, if you can read this, can you tell everyone on your team that literally everything they've done is incredible, and I love every single one of them. This is in all caps, by the way.
I can, and I will tell them that.
Great. Noted. Polar asks if the snail from HLD will make a cameo in HL and Breaker. We'll see. No promises. The snail was a labor of love, and it took us, 2 years to create that snail. That was most of our work on that project, was that one snail. So if we have 2 years to dedicate to this small little snail, then we'll do it.
Started now, then.
Yeah, I mean, we should have started a long time ago. All right. 8-bit Jutsu asks, how does someone approach SweetBaby with a project? Do you work with individuals without studios?
Yeah, we do. And I'm not sure if they mean on like that they'd like us to work on their project, or if they want to work with us, but both. We work with anybody. I think one of the things and one of the benefits to being a community and a company like this is that we can work on a lot of different things, because we'll work on something that's very, very big. And that means that we are, supported financially. We're comfortable to work on very, very small things for a smaller amount of time and to distribute our rate there. So for us, it is very important. Like one of the first jobs I got as a contractor, like just before SweetBaby, was with this teacher who made a game called Space Tow Truck to teach physics to his class. And I took that on, did a little couple hours of consultation, and then years later he was like, "Hey Kim, are you still doing consultation like for the same price and stuff?" I said, "Actually, we're SweetBaby, but yes." So why don't you just come? And funnily enough, we ended up getting a junior writer working on Space Tow Truck, and it was one of our first games to win like a local award.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it was
Uh,
a really weird and unexpected thing, but it was lovely.
can you pick up Space Tow Truck anywhere?
On Steam, yeah.
You can get it on Steam. All right. There's a question about will the lore. This is from Shumaraz. Will the lore from the old days be included in the story for Breaker? For example, flashbacks of Titans as it was told in Drifter. Yeah, I mean it takes place in the same world, like literally the same world. So we're definitely pulling on different threads from throughout. You know, we wove a pretty. Oh, this is turned into like the worst metaphor, but we wove a thick and elaborate tapestry with those threads, and so there's a lot of stuff for us to really point to and pull on and pull into Breaker's story as well. Though, you know, again, not a continuation of Drifter. Drifter story is done. This is its own thing, but you can be rest assured that we'll have plenty of things that. Will continue the mysteries of the world of Hyperlight. I'll say that much. Will there be Easter eggs in the game? Says Review Indie Game. You know, if by actual Easter eggs that the Easter Bunny left, sure. You know, why not? Easter eggs in other senses? Probably. I mean, like, what game doesn't have them these days? There's always some reference to something else or some thing that just kind of, hey, if you like go into this corner over here in this pocket, we'll give you like this, I don't know, cool little statue of the Drifter saluting you. So more than likely, yes. Kolnick 101. Anyway, serious question this time. Seeing that this is going to be a multiplayer game, will any of the meaning of the story be lost if you were played solo? Go for it, Kim.
Sure. I sure hope not.
I sure hope not
No.
as well.
No, I think it's very much our intention to ensure that both experiences are good, and to not only ensure that, but to ensure that like any kind of difference that we include is mirrored in both experiences, so that there will be things that as a solo player we might be able to adjust to make sure that understanding is there, or a multiplayer thing. And I think it's been something that we've talked a lot about, Alex, like, yes, as far as that dual experience. It's super important to us to make sure that's true.
Yeah, I'll just say on that subject that it's a challenge to make sure that you can tell this story meaningfully and with pace in both a single player and multiplayer context. And we're a roguelike that like cares about story. You know, there's not a whole lot of those. Like Hades has proven out that you can do it, but it's also a single player game. It has a lot of distinct advantages there with like funnel points and, you know, timing and like taking your time as a player. Whereas in a multiplayer context, there's just a lot of other things that kind of get in the way of storytelling. And so we need to find ways to get that out of the way or work with that as part of the structure of our story and embrace the things that happen and like the differences between single and multiplayer, so that again it feels as seamless as possible, like Kim was saying. Gregory asks, is there a central theme to the game you're willing to offer us now? A central theme.
Okay, I was gonna say I can offer less of a central like single thing, because I think that is very, very, that could give more. Well, it won't give a lot away, but I feel like it's a little much. But I think that what I can speak to is that there is a lot of thinking, and I think a lot of expression of what power means, and who should hold it, how we should hold it, how we should be distributed, and how power shifts. And I think that for me, it's been something that as a, you know, thematically, that we've spent a ton of time talking about, that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and I think is inherent to even the franchise. I would say, like, the IP of Hyperlight X is to me very challenging to separate from even the ideas of power and where it's distributed, and also what power means to an individual and to a group.
Yeah. The only other thing I'll add to that is just there's the word that we've been talking about a lot on many fronts, which is empathy. That's a central descriptor that I think helps become a guiding light for the ways that we think about our characters and about the story and about how, like Kim, you're talking about power and how it manifests and is shaped and used. So, that's a kind of cornerstone for us. Well, any of the places we know from Drifter be in Breaker. This takes place at a different location. You might see a glimpse of something from Drifter. Maybe. Can't make any promises there, but this is definitely a different land. What is that, an archipelago that's like a series of islands? I believe that's what that is. So it's its own set of things. So you might see hints of that stuff, but you're not going to go to Drifter stuff. Again, this is its own game, its own story. Takes place in its own series of locations. So, all right. Lakobi Let's Plays asks, how did your experience with writing Solar Ash affect your approach to making a narrative with dialogue? Oh, this is a great question. I can speak to this, but also Tyler would be able to speak to this too, because he did a lot of heavy lifting on Solar and has been doing, working on Breaker now since transitioning with us. And so he's got that kind of dual experience. But for me, from my perspective, Solar was a very different project, very different components in that experience that we wanted to elevate. Kind of even some of the themes were different. It was about breaking this kind of ruthless personal cycle, and it gave us a lot of perspective on the things not to do when writing a story, on the things that we should do, of course. And one of the biggest hurdles was voice acting. Having that in at the kind of nth hour or whatever else proved to be a very big undertaking on top of all the other stuff we're doing, which in the end it was worth it, and it got us to a certain level that I think it wouldn't have otherwise achieved. So that's great, but you need a lot more preparation is kind of what it comes down to really make that stuff work as best as it can, or to not have to kind of burn yourself out on narrative stuff. So, I commend the folks that worked on narrative for Solar, because it was a very monumental effort, getting all that stuff together and doing the heavy lifting and making sure that it all fit in with our VO at the final stretch of that. So the big takeaway for me is maybe we don't do VO unless we're really truly prepared. And so for Breaker, that was kind of a decision that we've made earlier on. It's we're not going to do VO. We're going to do some other stuff and make sure, because there's going to be a lot more writing in this game. But also it's about consistency and the types of voices that we want to convey and the tone that we want to hit. We've talked about tone a lot, and in this conversation we talk about tone a lot, and all other aspects of making this game, and no different on the narrative side, where tone is key to making sure that we convey and keep true to kind of what a hyperlight game can be. So wrapping up on questions here. Night Margin. Hi, Night Margin. How do you avoid being the judge and jury of what representation is right when in a position like this?
I think that there cannot be a judge and jury of what representation is right, because fundamentally there's no right form of representation, unless you create metrics for it yourself. And for me, those metrics are is this harmful? Is this unkind? Is this stereotypical? Is this offensive? And also, primarily, is this for the people that I'm writing about? I truly, when it comes to matters of representation, my audience is the people who are being represented. And so my goal then is to make sure that I am getting those people on board. I am bringing folks from that background, whatever it may be, into the room to help to build those things and to answer those questions, because ultimately I can't be judge and jury, but it is my job to offer what I believe is right, and to lead with, as we talked about, to lead with empathy. To say, okay, what am I trying to say, and what are we trying to convey, and what story we're trying to tell, and is this a story that is harmful? Is this a story whose narrative is saying something negative? And a lot of the time, the way that we operate is come in and say that we're not going to come in and tell you just this is offensive. We're going to come in and say this is an opportunity to do something different. And often our role is not to correct a script. It's not to work at that minute level. It's to really examine not what the story is, but what the narrative is. And that means for me, what the story is saying about the story itself. And that is kind of that weird little soft area of where you can't work directly, but you have to be really, really cognizant of it whenever you are working in this way. You have to be saying, okay, if I change the gender of this character, if I change the race of this character, how does this look? What are the optics of the scene now? And can we do something to reduce if it's offensive, but also can we do something that isn't what we expect? I think that for me is the biggest thing that I see when I'm brought a game, for example, that has someone say who looks like me in the lead role. It's not that I'm going like, oh, I'm so offended by all of this, because for me, the experience of racism, of sexism, of all of this is day to day, is in my life, is in all these different ways. So I'm not particularly, and that's the other thing I want to say is like, I'm not coming in going like, oh my God, I can't believe they would say this. I expect them to, because they don't have the perspective that they need, and they've come to me for a reason. So what I want to do is ensure that when I watch this character's movements, they make sense to the character's experience. They make sense given the things that would be true in the world. So an example of that, I think, is like, there's no such thing as right, but there is something that rings untrue. There is, if I see this game that has a black woman in the lead, and she has like interactions with a kind of person or with like a community or entity that normally would be very, very scary or very, very hostile or very this, I don't need to necessarily have the story be about racism, but it needs to at least acknowledge that, like, oh, her experience of this would be different from, say, a white guy. It's not to say that it's better or worse, but to see her react in a certain way has to ring true to me as a person who's had the experiences that I have. So if I see a story where she encounters like a minor amount of racism and is like, oh my God, I can't believe this, my question is going to be, well, hold on. She's been at this for many, many years. Why is this surprising to her? And what we find in that moment is, actually, this is a lesson in racism to somebody who does not experience it. And that's the kind of thing we want to change. And we also, for me, we're thinking about like opportunities there. It's like, I haven't actually seen X kind of character act in the way that they really would. All of a sudden, if we add that layer to it, we have a direction with the story that the team didn't originally think, but they're excited to explore. So it's tons of different vectors, and it doesn't always have to do with even like risk or representation. It's just about telling a better story and telling a more interesting story that feels more real.
That's an excellent answer. I think on that note, we should head out here. We've got, it's 1:13. We're at about our time. So Kim, thank you for hanging out here. Thank you for talking. Thank you for expressing.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for expressing your thoughts and answering questions and showing up. It's amazing to have you here, and it's amazing to continue to work with you all at SweetBaby and create rad stuff. So.
Yeah, ditto. I'm super excited, and I've been super excited. So yeah, thanks again, and I look forward to doing more work and also more of this, more talking.
We're gonna do a lot more talking. All right, everybody who joined up here with us today, appreciate you spending your time with us and watching us talk about things and looking at videos and some stills of things. Stay tuned, up on our social media. We'll let you know when we're going to post new things up, when we're going to have another heart-to-heart sooner rather than later, trying to make our way through and continue to have regularity now that we have Breaker out there, now that we can talk a little bit more about it. So we'll be doing some more reveals in these things as well, more fun art and other stuff like that. So thanks everybody for joining. I'll count it down. I'll see you some other time.